The question I,
On the record?
yes.
Thank you.
So Mr. Fahlgren, the question I was in the middle of was, why is it an advantage to do it under this contract with Facebook as opposed to just acquiring it as a system resource?
Right. So, I mean, if you were to acquire it as a system resource, then I don't think you meet the no adverse impact rule, because when Facebook added load to the system, their obligation was to do no adverse impact. And by adding the load, I would have to add another battery or some other capacity resource to the system. And then that capacity resource cost would be spread across all of the other customers. And you can speculate a situation where if Facebook was doing a very high load factor, that potentially then you could gain some benefit. But the most likely case is that the customer is underutilizing the battery, particularly since we went from 50 to 100 megawatts. So we're essentially guaranteed they're not going to use the extra 50 megawatts. And so then you would take that additional benefit away from the other customers, from the regular retail customers.
I'm not sure I follow that answer. Do you think you can explain that a little more?
Well, again,
another way?
Yeah. Well, again, if you look at the scenarios that Ms. Chan had, there was a 50 megawatt demand, right, which is what Mr. Phillips represented in his testimony, that said that's what the additional Facebook load demand or capacity requirements would be. Mm-hmm. So if you believe the model, then the best that Facebook or the customer would be using would be that 50%. And so then, then the best credit they would get based on the model would be that 10 million, where the overall battery provides a 21 million, and the customers are always getting that additional, the retail customers are always getting that additional $11 million.
I find that a little bit misleading, in the sense is you're acquiring a capability for 660,000. That's to have the battery and the use that it could have. And we're assigning a value to the benefits of the battery that's much greater than its actual annual cost. And then we're allocating that as a benefit to the customers when we've marked it up. And so I have to say that's not a real convincing argument.
But you've only marked it up by the theoretical demand payment that would be made by the customer as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a 1-for-1 offset. So maybe the battery as an individually is a lower demand, a lower capacity on a megawatt basis than the system capacity is. Mm-hmm. But the only benefit you're giving the customer is the same charge you would be giving the customer for that additional demand.
Okay.
So I don't think it's, I understand what you're saying, but, and again, I think the idea here was to hold harmless the other customers. And again, you could set up different situations where it would, if you did it the way you're suggesting, I would say I could develop many scenarios where it would actually add costs to the customer. Mm-hmm. And I think the idea here was to make sure we were assuring there was no adverse impact.
Okay. So Commissioner Maestas asked, what would happen if we said no to the storage agreement, ESA. What I would ask is, how would you feel if temporarily we only said no to the, what are we calling it, addendum, or I keep forgetting the name?
Yeah, addendum.
Addendum. If we only said no to the addendum, but approved the storage resource until we could iron out the kinks in the addendum, or at least get everybody comfortable with it.
I see it problematic on a contractual basis because I don't have the contractual right to agree to that. If you look in the special service contract, is the customer has I have to agree with the customers on the conditions precedent. So if I was to eliminate, I can't unilaterally eliminate a condition precedent without going back to the customer.
No, I
If I was the
understand that.
customer, if I was the customer, then I would say, well, you're asking me to make a forward payment when I don't understand what the benefits will be. So I would say that's somewhat problematic. The benefits in the demand payment.
Well, I guess what I would say is until we've agreed on the addendum, we haven't asked them to make a forward payment because we haven't come up with a structure.
Yeah. So then I would say we're going to be at a logger jam on both the PPA and ESA, and we won't move forward.
So earlier, staff and Mr. Borman had asked the question, weren't there provisions in the contract that allow you to go back and adjust it based on commission conditions that might be placed? Are you saying that does not apply here?
It applies, but I can't represent anything that that we would come to terms on that.
That sounds pretty rigid. That there's only one way to do this. That we couldn't discuss structures that everyone was comfortable with.
No, I appreciate that, and but again, I want to represent what I can do. I'm not saying I can't, but I don't want to represent that I can.
Okay.
And again, if I was the customer, I would say, well, I don't understand. If you can't tell me what the benefit is, then why do I agree to the cost? And basically what you're saying is go ahead and approve the ESA and move forward with the ESAs, but not solve the benefit question until later. And it's like, well, then we're going to be at a stop until we understand what the benefits to the customer are. So approving the ESA likely doesn't do anything for me without approving the addendum.
Okay. I'm not sure how that plays out in reality. Would it impact the developer in any way if you're changing your how you divvy up the costs between Facebook and PNM? How does that impact the developer and
It wouldn't, but I wouldn't be allowed to give to the developer the release to go ahead on proceeding with the contract until I had approval of all those items.
So it's totally, so in practice, the key issues to overcome here are divvying up the pie between Facebook and PNM and its other customers. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand that. I think the key here is recognizing that the customer is adding demand, capacity requirements to the system, and then the customer is solving those by the battery. And so then do they get the full credit for what they're solving?
Well, yeah. So does my question goes to, would the developer walk just because we were changing financial arrangements between Facebook and PNM?
I would say the direct answer to that is no. But again, the developer may walk if I'm not able to give him a release on the contract, which obviously I'll have to get agreement with the customer and solve the benefits before I can move forward. So it would only be if we continue to delay the PPA would the developer want to walk or not, or have ability to meet the contract.
Okay, so I have to say, based on what I know so far, I have a lot of reservations about the financial arrangements. And maybe we can solve that problem through a workshop, or maybe through staff working with some of your folks and going through some examples. And I'm perfectly happy to expedite that process. As I said at the beginning, I think this, in the big picture, makes sense to go forward with. And I'm just looking for ways to be sure we go forward and that the commission feels comfortable that non-Facebook customers are not footing the bill.
Right.
So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Mr. Vicente Aguilar, do you have any questions for Mr. Falgren?
Yes, can you hear me? Hearing the examiner?
I can.
Okay. I would like to ask Mr. Falgren about adding value to the potential applications that's before the commission. Can he describe what his perception as far as adding values and cost control?
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, you cut out for about the last half of your question. Could you repeat that, please?
Okay,
More
sorry
loudly.
about that. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to ask Mr. Falgren about what does this mean for P&M customers when we're talking about adding values and cost control by P&M?
Yeah, and help me if I go in the wrong direction, but again, adding, as you add the customer load to the system, that requires additional capacity.
That means Facebook load, right?
Yeah,
Big C.
yeah. Technically, I'm supposed to say the customer, but you have to correct me.
Doesn't help. It's confusing for some of us.
Yeah, so as we add, so as the customer added load, there's a required to run the system reliably, there is an additional capacity requirement, which is the capability to produce energy. Okay, not the energy itself. That's solved with the PPAs. And so the significant value I see here is the fact that the customer said why they only have to solve that by 50 megawatts, they agreed to solve it by 100 megawatts. And so what they've essentially done is giving the rest of the retail customers an additional 50 megawatts of capacity. And I see that as a significant value. I see other value streams there as well. The fact that we're all moving to 100% carbon free, Facebook or the customer is moving faster than we are and providing additional resources, I think is a value. Adding additional battery flexibility on our system, I think is a battery and is a value in general. But I think the significant value I see here to the other customers directly is the fact that the customer is providing an additional 50 megawatts of capacity that it didn't necessarily have to do, and is giving that to the retail customers essentially.
What about when you talk about capacity, can you talk about energy security with this proposed projects?
And security, you're talking about the ability that it's available.
Reliability in general.
Right. Yeah. And again, as we see, why batteries aren't the end all, right? They have limited energy capability. They do not rely on a fuel source. Right. So, and so when natural gas prices spike, I don't have to, lean on that for capacity. So again, I do believe it provides, and again, I think the best system security is having a good diversity of resources. So I do believe this battery adds to that diverse resource portfolio. And maybe I didn't answer that, but let me know.
Well, I'm a little bit concerned about what our staff's recommendations are. What is your perspective or your analysis with the responses that we were given from staff members?
Yeah, I think, and I might not be the best witness, but I'll do my best here is, so I think the concerns were, one is the ESA was beyond the requirements. And I think that is not, we do not believe that is accurate. One is because when you look at this, as the customer added load to our system, even previously, the previous or the special service contract already provided that we were providing demand or capacity credits to them through both solar and wind. So like Ms. Chan explained, and I think Mr. German explained as we opened up, right now, when they add wind and they add solar to our system, we're doing the very same thing as we're giving them demand credits for those resources because they procured those full resources, which came with some demand capabilities. Now the battery is the same thing, and the battery was contained in the original special service contract as additional storage capability. And so we're just clarifying the percent, or that we're providing the same methodology, the same approach to batteries for demand credits that we already provide for wind and solar. So I think we think it's very consistent. It's very much in line. And all we were trying to do with the amendment is not really change it, is really clarify it. That's what was intended, that when there was storage added, that storage also would have a demand component. And so we're just trying to recognize that demand component is in front of us. So I think that's the essence of maybe the disagreement.
Thank you. That's all my questions, hearing examiner.
Commissioner Byrd, do you have any questions for Mr. Falgren? And
No, I'm not going to ask any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Amer, do you have any questions for Mr. Falgren?
No questions, Ms. Presiding Officer.
Okay.
Carolyn, are you going to ask me if I have any questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Hall, do you have any questions?
Yes. Well, actually, I was going to ask him about arbitrage, but he answered it already. Thank you, Mr. Falgren. Really what I would like to ask is the question that Commissioner Fishman asked several times and didn't feel satisfied with the answer. And I couldn't really paraphrase it too well, but it's based on the notion that there are lingering concerns that to the extent Facebook, the customer, gets a bill credit above and beyond what they pay, the difference in those two figures will somehow be borne by ratepayers. Can you explain why not? And I know you've tried several times, but I just wondered if you could hone it down a little one more time.
Okay. Yeah, let me try. And again, so again, there's no cross subsidization. There's nothing bore by the customer, by the retail customers. I think.
Yeah, but don't just say that.
Yeah.
Why.
Let me, if I can. So again, I mean, this chart's better explained by Ms. Chan, but we can go back to it, which is that table that we looked at before. And you have.
Do you want to pull that up, Carolyn, or whoever's in charge, Isaac?
Yes,
Table
I'll do that.
4B.
Shoot. I'm sorry, this is going to take me a minute because I lost the Dropbox.
It's okay.
Which exhibit is it, Carolyn? I can put it up if you'd like.
Okay, oh, that'd be great. It's P&M Exhibit 4, and it's page 2.
Right, if we could, and again, I think the key there
If
is.
you can keep facing toward the microphone, I can hear you, but if you
Very
turn
good. Sorry about
sideways, I
that.
can't.
Let me move my book over here so you can see.
Good. I know it's awkward. Sorry.
But I think the key there is when you look at line 9, which is just down a little bit,
Yeah.
that number is always equal to line 3.
Okay.
And so they're offsetting. And so you're giving them a credit, but you're only giving them a credit on a theoretical demand that they would have incurred. It's not an actual cost. It's a theoretical that they would have incurred if they had just leaned on the system for capacity.
So, okay, let's just put that in non-utility language. Well, it's still utility language.
Yes.
But, so you're saying if Facebook, just say that again differently.
Right. So when you look on line 3, that I would take that more as a theoretical demand component. So they are adding so in the first case, they add 25 megawatts of demand, or, and that cost, if they were to buy that off the system, right, without solving that capacity on their own, they would pay the 5.5 million. Well, the only credit they're ever going to get is down to the 9 on line 9, which matches that. So it's a theoretical demand offset by basically the same credit. So there's no other cost coming from the customers, or there's no other cost going to customers, because if they don't do the demand that's on 3, there's no credit that's on line 9. So there's no benefit between the two. Now, Mr. Fishman would be correct in saying that, you know what, well, it looks like they found a resource that maybe solves demand and capacity cheaper than the overall system credit, right? But they took the over under on that, and they're always limited to the 7.9. And again, anytime, the best that they can do is come out at 0 from the cost from line 3 versus line 9. If you're able to go all the way to 100 megawatts, the best you could do is come out to 0, right? For the difference between the overall benefits that's on line 8. So if you look on line 8, that 21.8 million is always a benefit that's sitting on the system at all times that serves all customers. And then the only benefit that you're providing them back is this theoretical benefit that theoretical demand that we would have charged them. And you're providing that offset to that because they already solved the same demand response requirements through line 5. So there's no additional demand on the system that the other customers have to solve because they already solved it. So it's really an accounting issue here, and there's no other costs that go to customers. So it's not like if we take that 10.9 million, that's money coming out of other retail customers' pockets. Absolutely not. There are never any money coming out of other retail customers' pockets, because it's only an offset to the demand that we would have. It's only an offset to the theoretical demand we would have charged them had they not provided the demand or the capacity additions to solve the hole they created when they added load.
Okay, when you talk about it in terms of solving the hole in the system that's created by a customer wanting to add more load, I get it. And I guess I hear you saying that, and I don't know if this, this theoretical offset is a red herring. Maybe it's not all that relevant. Maybe the only thing that's really relevant is line 8. And is that something that that production offset, is that something that's ever going to represent a threat to customers, other small C customers pocketbooks, and I'm hearing you say no, because the larger hole for demand created by, let's see, the larger hole in the system created by customers' desire to expand and the need for more capacity. Is, well, okay, how does that relate to line 8? How does line 8 solve, how is that related to the solution that customer brings to that capacity hole?
Yeah, so the customer, and again, I don't disagree with Mr. Fishman, that that's a theoretical number as well. And we've escalated that by line, I mean, we've basically calculated that by line 2, right? Which is, but we have no better number because that's the number we all agreed to in the last rate case.
Mhm.
And so then that's the theoretical overall system. So then line 8 is the overall theoretical benefit to the whole system. And so then you say, okay, well, that's the benefit. You know, we can
Right.
argue about, well, is line 2 relevant today or not, but we'll fight that out in the next rate case. So based on the last rate case data, line 8 is the value to the system. Now, yes, they solved that same equation for $7.9 million. Now, they've also got all the other costs that they're borrowing for the transmission, you know, their share of the transmission, their share of the other PPA resources, all the other things that go with that. So I don't think they're getting like a super deal. But again, what you're saying then is if they hadn't solved it, if they haven't solved the whole, is we would charge them what's in line 3. And then if we went out and built the system, then that would, you know, that's what we would charge them. But again, so then that's not like, oh, that's money being paid by the other customers because they already solved those demand issues. So they're not a reality that there's additional demand that's coming off the rest of the system. There's this additional demand is solved by the new battery they've installed. And so then the best they can do is to solve and get the same credit as they would have been charged in line 3. That's the best they can do, is to get the credit for the same demand they would have got charged. So then there's no other costs coming from other retail customers. So again, that's not money going back and forth between retail customers and the customer or retail customers and PNM. And again, that rate that's set in line 2 was set. And so there's no way for PNM to charge other customers additional dollars. There's no mechanism can do that because their rates were already set in the lat race case. And then we can argue about, you know, some of the way we do it, but I think this is the best, cleanest, and best way to do it. And again, I could see us revisiting this in the next rate case once we've got maybe some additional data that we can look at. But I think this is the best scenario that allows us to move forward.
Great. Steve, do you have any follow-up questions on that at all, or does that help in any way?
Well, I'll try one here, which is looking again at line 8, production revenue requirement offset. And a theoretical number, as you say, does that in any way relate to my question earlier about what system benefits do we get? And if so, you know, it gets back to the rate case calculation, but can you draw any relationship between that number and benefits that we might accrue from the battery? That you say
I would say so. I mean, we've
just let me finish this thought here real quick.
Sorry.
So we're saying that we would, you'd be using it 100% right away. You know, does this imply line 8? Again, just using this as an example, not real numbers, but does this imply that is the amount of system benefits that the battery would bring?
Yes. And the conclusion I have is, I mean, we established that rate in line 2 in the last rate case, so we can argue that number.
Yeah.
But again, we argued that if you add additional demand, that's the cost I'm going to charge you, that 54, 57.
Yeah.
So on one side, you said, if you add demand, I'm going to charge you that. So on the other side, if I reduce the demand or I eliminate the need to expand the demand, then you would have to conclude that it's the same benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, yes, that 21.8 is the additional benefit to the system. And then the good thing is the customers receive that benefit immediately. As the capital customer continues to expand out. Plus, as you can see here, would see that the capital C customer never utilizes all the benefits that are in that. So those additional benefits then flow to the other retail customers. And again, we can argue about that number, but that's probably a better case to argue that number in the next rate case.
Right. And one more, and I'm still struggling with the idea that as the actual, as Facebook's draw on that battery as a system resource apparently increases, they get a bigger and bigger credit to offset their $7 million a year. And the whole way this is set up, it kind of flips upside down the way you think of things. The more they use the asset, the more they get a credit against the cost of the asset. And I may be just, I struggle with that. Can you explain why it works that way and why it makes sense?
Yeah, and again, I think that you got to look at the 7.9 as a fixed cost for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the only credit they get is the corresponding theoretical demand payment they would have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you look at line 3 and line 9, they always match. So yes, as they continue to get an increased credit, they also get an increased theoretical demand payment. And so the two always offset, and that's why you're always paying the 7.9 down below.
So explain that. That's the piece that I've heard 2 or 3 times, and I still don't understand where they're getting that theoretical increase in the demand payment.
Well, if you look at line 3, again, that 5.5, let's say, and again, that's just a calculation based on the 54.7. So the only way that so that's the theoretical payment. So if you didn't have a battery, they would pay that additional because they added additional demand requirements on the system.
You to pay which additional?
Well, they wouldn't. So if they didn't add a battery, you'd have to charge them the 5.5 that's in line 3 for scenario B. But since they already solved the demand credit, you're giving them back credit, but you're not giving them the $21.8 million, which is its full benefit of the battery. You're only giving them back the same amount that you would have theoretically charged them had they not solved the demand charge. And so you're saying, I'm going to charge you, basically, I'm going to charge you line 3, 5.5, but I'm going to credit you 5.5 as well. But you're still going to pay the 7.9. And then there's additional demand, demand capacity beyond that the other customers get to utilize.
So I characterized the nature of this deal to Ms. Chan as what's really happening here is when you clear away all the complexities and the legalisms and all that stuff, is Facebook is paying $7.9 million in order, in the case of, if we went with scenario 3 as an example, in order to get a $10 million or $11 million credit on what their bill would have been otherwise. And as much as you guys explain, that's what it keeps coming back to. Is there any reason you disagree with Ms. Chan on that? She said, yes, that's true.
Yeah, I think it's a little generalization. Again, but you, if they did not solve the battery, if they did not provide the demand and they were providing a full 50 megawatts of capacity, yes, they'd pay 10.9. Since they've solved the capacity on their own, they're paying 7.9. Yes, I agree with that.
Okay,
But we ought to let's be clear that they're not, the other retail customers are not offsetting that, right? That's not an additional, that differential is not coming from other retail customers, right?
and
But Facebook took,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
but you could speculate and say, well, I could make additional money off of the customer by selling them demand right in the process. Well, they took the over under on it, and yeah, they might have come up under if you're at 50, but
What
they
does that
certainly
mean? They took the over under. Could you go explain
Well,
that? I don't know what that means.
they made the decision to say, hey, I will provide you, this capacity resource.
They being Facebook.
The customer, yes.
Yes.
Now, are they going to use the full 50 all the time? Absolutely not. So again, why that's a theoretical scenario for C, and where there could be a theoretical benefit that they went and solved the capacity issue on their own rather than, then you could make that conclusion, but they're not going to have that demand charge all the time. And so they generally will come out in the red on that. Plus, the way they've done it is they provided a tremendous amount of additional benefit to the other customers. So again, we would have to conclude that there is no harm and only benefit to the other retail customers. Now, could we have made more money off of them doing this a different way? Maybe. I would say that's a big maybe. But again, we would have to conclude that there's no benefit. I mean, there's no detrimental harm to other retail customers. And again, the over under or the risk of that was taken by the customer, and they have provided significant additional capacity to the system.
What, Steve, go ahead. You ask your question, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. And this was Ms. Chan's testimony, not yours. So if you can't answer this, I understand perfectly. But she said no cost to customers until the next rate case was how I understood her answer to the previous bench requests, and that it would all get adjusted in the rate case, which implied to me that there would be a cost once we had gotten to the first rate case after this this project goes into operation. Any additional information you can give on that?
Well, I think the only, and again, we'd have to get Ms. Chan back, but I think all we're literally looking at is line 2. So line 2 will probably change. That number will change either up or down during the next rate case.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
so then obviously you can say, well, what's the benefit cost associated with, what's the overall benefits to the customers? But the way this is structured is the customer solved their own demand issues and their own energy issues. So there should never be a cross subsidization from the other customers. You might look at this chart and say, well, I gave them a higher charge and I gave them the same corresponding higher credit, but there's never a cross subsidization with the other retail customers.
Okay, thank you. I've taken that, we've beaten that dead horse.
A horse well needing beaten. So
Oh, boy.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I don't have any other questions, Ms. Glick.
Okay, Melissa, we have 5 more minutes of questioning for this witness. Are you okay doing that before we take a break?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Mr. Gifford, you have up to 5 minutes for redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'll try and do it in less than that. Mr. Falgren, we had talked earlier on in questions by the commissioners about the prospect that the PPAs might be approved, but the ESA might be postponed for later. What would be your opinion of that outcome?
Yeah, it really doesn't help me. It really doesn't help moving forward. The PPA, ESA are commingled. The PPA, ESA, and the special service contract amendment are all commingled. So if you give me approval of the PPA, I really can't move forward at the time.
And what might be the effect on the investment tax credit as it relates to the ESA?
Yeah, I'd have to go back to the developers on that. I mean, obviously there were a lot of folks that had timing concerns or requests on this on these PPA ESAs. So I mean, it could have an impact. I just couldn't speak to the extent of them, to be honest.
And one final question, Mr. Falgren, how does the addendum to the special service contract fit together in your mind with regard to the approval of the PPAs and the ESA?
Right, and again, if you look in section 17 of each of the PPA and the ESA, it's very clear that the approval of the PPA, the ESA, and the special service amendment are all prerequisites to any of the contracts being effective. So they are all tied together contractually. I recognize that there's contract language that says we could renegotiate, but again, those are generally boilerplates that would say, well, if the bottom fell out, that what would you do? So I do see delays in the project and the ability to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Falgren. Thank you, Your Honor. We have no further questions.
Mr. Falgren, thank you. I'm not going to excuse you again in case the commissioners have questions later on.
Very
Right.
good. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and take a break and come back at 3:20.
Madam Hearing Examiner?
Yes.
Before we break, if I could just ask a question. My witness, Jim Dauphiné, has a hard stop at 5:45, so I wanted to ask if maybe he could go before some of the P&M witnesses, or if we expect this hearing to continue into tomorrow.
I guess I need to defer to the commissioners on that. As to whether you think this is going to continue into tomorrow.
I hope not. I'm not going to have a lot more questions personally. I don't know how
I have questions either.
Yeah, the only area that I have questions is the impacts on the transmission system, and I'm kind of keeping my powder dry for Mr. Fridley. So yeah, I don't anticipate asking too many more questions.
Okay, we have 4 more. We have 4 more P&M witnesses. We have Mr. Dauphiné for NM area, and we have the staff witness.
How much time do we have scheduled for all those witnesses?
Well, it depends how late you want to go today. Melissa has told me she can go later than 5. I don't know how much later than 5 she can go. So we have, about after we take the break, we'll have a little more than an hour and a half until we get to 5.
Excuse me.
I'd like to stop then. I have a 7-hour drive ahead of me after this meeting to get back to Albuquerque. That's just my personal need. I'm not doing all the driving, but it'd be nice if we could get done, but it'd be nice if we get the case right too. So that's important.
So would people be comfortable going to 5:45 if need be? But once we get there, we stop, hard stop.
I thought, wait, what's the 5:45? That's Ms. Gould's witnesses hard stop, right?
Meaning we would stop if we had to, we could go to 5:45, but we wouldn't go beyond that.
I think Ms. Amer was trying.
Go ahead.
Yes, I don't know, can anyone hear me? But thank you. We do not have a court reporter available for Thursday. And I believe that Friday you already have a public hearing for EPE.
Correct.
That would leave any kind of a continuation, I believe, till Monday. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's an energy efficiency hearing on Monday, but that shouldn't take more than an hour, but I'm not sure exactly what time it is. On Tuesday, we have an IRP workshop at 2, and on Wednesday, we have the public open meeting again. And then Thursday, I think there's something going on with community solar. So just wanted to let everybody know all that. But we could continue on Monday, I believe afternoon, and Isaac should correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, Monday morning, we could continue if we can find a court reporter. Tuesday morning, we could also continue to. The court reporters have said they're definitely available on Tuesday morning or all day Tuesday, but we have the IRP workshop at 2. So if we continue to next Tuesday, we would have to stop at 2 most likely. That's probably going to be the best option for us. But Monday might be a possibility, but I would have to check with our various court reporters to find someone to cover Monday. I haven't been able to confirm someone for Monday yet.
But you have someone for Tuesday?
Yes, Cumbre, who's working for us right now, has told me that they're definitely available next Tuesday.
Oh. I wouldn't mind if we did it on Monday, just to simplify Tuesday, but
here's a suggestion. Let's keep it in our back pocket until we see how long it takes to go through the rest of the witnesses. And again, I would toss out that, maybe we can go to 5:45 today, but no later. And if we can't finish by then, we'll continue.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Does anyone object to the next witness being Mr. Dauphiné?
No.
Staff doesn't object.
Okay, so let's come back at 3:25 and then Mr. Dauphiné will be the first witness.
Thank you.
Melissa, are you ready?
I surely am, yes.
Okay, will you please swear the witness?
You bet. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Gould?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Good afternoon. Can you please identify yourself for the record?
I am James R. Dauphiné, that's spelled Dauphinais.
Who are you providing testimony for today?
The New Mexico Affordable Reliable Energy Alliance, or NM area.
Can you please identify NM Area Exhibit 1 for the record?
That is my rebuttal testimony.
Do you have any corrections to this document?
I do not.
Was this document prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
Are your answers true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
If the same questions were asked of you today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move into evidence NM Area Exhibit 1.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
NM Area Exhibit 1 is admitted. I assume P&M has no cross-examination because of the prohibition on friendly cross. Okay, Mr. Borman?
Commissioner, hearing examiner Glick, could you please let the record reflect that I returned to the hearing?
Yes.
Thank you.
And that was Commissioner Hall. Mr. Borman?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Good afternoon, Mr. Dauphiné.
Good afternoon, Mr. Borman.
You state in your rebuttal testimony on page 1 that you are appearing on behalf of NM area, but not on behalf of Greater Kudu. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you on occasion appear on behalf of NM area with the participation of Greater Kudu?
There have been proceedings I have testified on behalf of the NM area with special participation by Greater Kudu, yes.
Okay. Well, you use the term special participation. You use it just now and you use it in your pre-filed testimony. What does special participation mean?
I'm just quoting how it's presented in the pleadings to the commission. I would have to defer to counsel to know the specific meaning of that.
Okay, so you don't know, and that's fine. Okay. Do you know why Greater Kudu is not participating in this proceeding?
I do not know.
Okay. Now you say on page 5 of your testimony, I'll give you just a second to get there. You say there that you disagree with staff's recommendation for a hearing before a hearing examiner. You see that?
Yes, I said one was not necessary, yes.
Oh, can you tell us where in your testimony you explain why a hearing before a hearing examiner is not necessary?
I don't know if I'm going to be able to point you to a specific place, but I do discuss in general in my testimony that I felt that PNM had made a sufficient demonstration in its direct testimony with respect to showing that the proposed transaction, all the components they've asked recovery for are consistent with the no net adverse impact standard.
Okay. Now, can you turn to page 8 of your testimony?
Yes.
Okay, and actually, I need to get to page 8 of your testimony as well. On this page, you criticize staff for suggesting that 100 megawatts of storage is unnecessary at this time. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Okay. Do you know if PNM will have to invest in any system upgrades to accommodate the 100 megawatts of new energy storage?
Can you define what you mean by system upgrades?
Well, I mean, will there be any necessary transmission investment that needs to occur?
Yes, that was explained in PNM's direct testimony.
Okay. Do you know if the transmission upgrades for 100 megawatts of new energy storage are the same as the transmission upgrades for 50 megawatts of new storage?
I don't know the specifics of that. I will note that the transmission upgrades, the cost recovery for transmission upgrades was not something that PNM requested approval for or saw any sort of approval for in this proceeding. And my recommendation is that the commission give no indication with regard to that issue, that that issue be left to a future proceeding, base rate proceeding of PNM, the next one.
I understand that, and I'm not asking about the cost recovery. I'm just asking if the amount that needs to be invested would be the same for 100 megawatts of new energy storage as it would be for 50 megawatts of new energy storage.
It could potentially be more if you're looking at the output of the battery storage combined with the solar occurring at the same time. I do not know that's the planned operation. And I don't know if, in fact, there is a higher cost here for having 50 megawatts of batteries versus 100.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions for Mr. Dauphiné. Thank you, Mr. Dauphiné.
You're welcome.
Chairman Fishman? No? Okay. Commissioner Maestas?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Good afternoon, Mr. Dauphiné. You mentioned in your testimony that no parties had protested this application. Do you see that as a benefit? And if you could explain the positive nature of not having a protest to this application.
The positive implication is that other customers of PNM that are very concerned with reliability and cost, other stakeholders that are active in proceedings for PNM before the commission, that they are not expressing any concern with this proposal either with regard to reliability or the impact on cost for other customers.
Consistent with the question that Mr. Borman asked you regarding kind of the relative difference of the need for transportation investment had the ESA been 50 megawatts versus 100 megawatts. So, and I realize we work in a business that is embedded with calculations and analyses. But if you could maybe just give me your professional opinion in terms of what the relative comparison of the net benefit would be, the net benefit of adding 50 megawatts relative to the additional expenditure in the transmission system. In other words, do the benefits of adding 50 megawatts potentially outweigh the costs of the additional transmission investments and interconnection facilities as a result of the 50 megawatt increase in the ESA above what the customer required?
Okay, so first, we don't know that in fact, that difference between 50 megawatts versus 100 megawatts of storage, I'm not aware of any demonstrated transmission in the next base rate case. That PNM is not putting that issue before you. They're not asking to recover any transmission costs or have any approval for that as proceeding. So the commission can fully explore, as a layman, I can't give a legal opinion, only based on my regulatory experience, but based on my regulatory experience, my understanding is the commission is in full control of the cost allocation, how it gets allocated to customers in the next base rate case. So that is something that the commission can deal with then.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Madam Presiding Officer.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, do you have any questions for Mr. Dauphiné?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Byrd, do you have any questions for Mr. Dauphiné?
I do not.
Okay. Commissioner Hall, do you have any questions for Mr. Dauphiné?
No, thank you.
Chairman Fishman?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Amer?
No questions.
Okay. Ms. Gould, do you have 5 minutes for any redirect?
I just have one question. Mr. Dauphiné.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Were you in the room or in the Zoom room when Tom Falgren was testifying?
Yes, I was.
Do you recall him testifying that the LGIA for the solar ESA project is capped at the size of the solar project?
He may have said that. I'll have to defer to the record. I can't recall.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay. Does anyone have any objection to me excusing Mr. Dauphiné? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dauphiné. I appreciate your testimony and you are excused.
Thank you.
So Mr. German or Mr. Gifford, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would call PNM witness Nick Phillips to the virtual stand.
Melissa, will you please swear the witness?
Yes, raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Phillips. Could you state your name and spell it for the record, please?
My name is Nicholas L. Phillips. My last name is spelled Phillips.
And by whom are you employed and what do you do there?
I'm employed by a public service company of New Mexico. My title is Director of Integrated Resource Planning.
Thank you. And do you have in front of you, Mr. Phillips, what's been pre-marked as PNM Exhibit 9?
Yes, sir, I do.
And do you have any corrections to that testimony?
No, sir, I do not.
And Mr. Phillips, if I were to ask you the same questions that are contained in that exhibit today, would you have the same answers were it live testimony?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, Commissioners, I would move the admission of PNM Exhibit 9, the direct testimony of Nick Phillips.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. PNM Exhibit 9 is admitted.
Mr. Phillips is available for examination, Your Honor.
Did you want to move into testimony his rebuttal?
Oh, I'm sorry. I would like to move that in as well. Mr. Phillips, do you also have in front of you what is marked as PNM Exhibit? I had it a moment ago.
It would be number 10.
Number 10.
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Phillips, do you have any corrections to that exhibit? And Mr. Phillips, if I were to ask you the same questions contained in PNM Exhibit 10 today, would you have the same answers?
Yes, I would.
And with that, Your Honor, thank you for correcting me. I would move the admission of PNM Exhibit 10 into evidence.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay. PNM Exhibit 10 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And with that, Mr. Phillips is available for examination.
Okay. Ms. Gould, can I just assume you have no cross-examination for any of the PNM witnesses given the prohibition on friendly cross-examination?
That's correct, Madam Hearing Examiner.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Borman?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner, and good afternoon, Mr. Phillips.
Good afternoon.
I just have a few questions.
Yes, sir.
On pages 6 and 7 of your direct testimony, and I'll give you a second to get there, you discuss that you modeled the data center's projected load to determine the impact on system reliability. Do you see that?
Yes, sir. At the bottom of page 6.
Yes. And I think it kind of carries on to page 7 because you further state that your analysis showed that the addition of a 50 megawatt 4-hour battery would help maintain the system's projected LOLE. And I'll ask you to define what LOLE is. Is that loss of load expectation?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. So with the addition of a 50 megawatt 4-hour battery would help maintain the system's projected loss of load expectation prior to adding the projected load and the renewable resources proposed in this case. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Oh, and then PNM thus recommended to the customer that at a minimum, a 50 megawatt 4-hour storage project would be needed to maintain sufficient resource adequacy on PNM's system. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
When you did this modeling, did you do modeling that addressed different sizes of a battery storage project?
In a sense, yes. So we first were identifying, and Mr. Dahlgren alluded to this earlier, we first were identifying, a few different portfolios of renewable resources that would equate to the annual energy requirements to meet the 100% renewable service that's allowed for in the special services contract. Then we had to iterate different sizes of energy storage to get to where the system LOLE prior to the addition of the loads and the renewable resources was set back to that prior condition. And so we had to make a few educated guesses, essentially a little bit above and a little bit below, and found where that sweet spot was, and it came out right at about 50 megawatts. That's where we added that plus the renewable resources and their load. The system LOE was the same, absent any of those additions.
Okay. And did PNM in its modeling, did you model any storage behind the meter for the customer?
No, we were not asked to model any of that.
Okay. Did PNM model what might happen if one or more of the resources sought to be approved here do not meet the deadlines set forth in the agreements?
We didn't model it. However, if the resources that were, exactly sized to meet the incremental resource adequacy requirements due to the load did not come online in time, one could easily extrapolate that you wouldn't be meeting the designated reliability metrics.
I'm sorry, please repeat the rest of that. One could easily extrapolate that you wouldn't meet.
The designated reliability metrics.
Thank you.
And what would be required in such a situation?
Could you explain what you mean by required?
Well, if you didn't meet those reliability metrics, what would PNM be forced to do?
We would have to examine whatever options were available to us and whatever time frame was available. So it could be if there was a long time, if we were given a long notice that something was going to be delayed, we would talk to Facebook. Potentially, they could issue another RFP. We'd have to go through another procurement process. If there was very little time, we would have to, hope for a liquid market. There's a range of things you can do depending on how much time you have available to yourself.
Now, on page 7 of your direct testimony, you state that the 100 megawatt storage facility will be optimally dispatched by PNM as a system resource. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and you might remember, I think you were here, I asked Stella Chan this question. Are there certain rules or guidelines that govern how PNM is required to dispatch the storage facility?
The only operational restrictions would be those prescribed in the contract itself. Mr. Falgren spoke to some of those. There's a 365 equivalent cycles per year requirement. There's an average state of charge over the year requirement, things of that nature. But these are the same requirements that would be required of PNM when operating any of the other ESAs that have already been approved or that we're seeking approval for.
So to your knowledge, there's no like external kind of requirements that say PNM has to operate the energy storage in a certain fashion?
None whatsoever. PNM is given the full dispatch control over those resources, and we will operate them for the benefit of all customers.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions for Mr. Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Fishman, do you have any questions for Mr. Phillips?
Yes, one question. Mr. Phillips, would there be any impact at all on system grid management if PNM acquired this resource as a PNM system resource not subject to the special services, the SSA, if I've got that title right, with Facebook?
So just to make sure I understand your question, is the question if the battery was not a paired facility in the...
Still a paired facility, but instead of being acquired under the special services contract, was just a independent, not independent, but was a PNM contractual obligation, not subject to the special services contract.
Okay, so the hypothetical would be as if the ESA was a cost that was passed through ordinary cost of service, as opposed to the cost being dedicated to Facebook. Or I'm sorry. Operationally, it should be the same. Contractually, I don't know if that's doable. That's a Mr. Falgren question.
Yeah. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Maestas.
Yes, Madam Presiding Officer. I just have one question for Mr. Phillips. In terms of consistency with the integrated resource plan, the whole Facebook data center initially broke ground prior to my tenure here on the commission. So obviously, and as I understand it, they really only planned one phase, but here we are. I think this is the third, I believe the third phase of expansion or so, doesn't that present difficulties when it comes to resource planning? I realize you're probably planning for reliability overall in the system, but this is a specific customer with specific needs, and we see how these projects are having implications on the transmission system and interconnection facility. So is Facebook as one important customer that you have, are they willing to engage in longer term planning in terms of the future expansion of this data center? It just seems, very segmented in the way this is unfolding. And as a former transportation planner, it's a bit unnerving to me. So is PNM concerned at all in that this customer, that Facebook is really, I mean, obviously these phases aren't just popping up, but is there some long-term planning going on the part of Facebook with respect to this data center?
So I appreciate the question, and I will certainly start by saying it's a much more complex and difficult problem than I think any of us ever could imagine in terms of how the system's changing and changing rapidly. We do work with the customer, capital C customer, as well as other potential large economic development loads when they reach out to our business units and start trying to figure out what we can count on, what we can't. As it relates to the integrated resource plan, the customer's expansion that is included in this case, as well as those resources, were all worked into the modeling done in the integrated resource plan, as well as there's additional high economic development load scenarios that we studied to say, well, what happens if even more customers come in that are similar load shapes and in larger sizes? The more we can do to get information that we can count on ahead of time, the better. We're constantly talking with our large customers about potential growth that they may be considering, and new customers about what they may be bringing to the state, and trying to find a way where we can nimbly react to those requirements is paramount to ensuring that we're able to grow and grow reliably. It's a little bit different than we've ever seen before in that we're having larger and larger customers wanting to come here, and they want shorter and shorter time to commit in order to join our state and our economy.
So would you consider like another phase, let's just say that Facebook plans on yet another phase, would you consider that to be a material, or at least an action that would initiate a material change to your IRP? Or do you consider the IRP, the current IRP, robust enough and modeled, as you stated, for high renewable penetration cases to meet general load growth? Do you think that your planning's robust enough, or would another Facebook center expansion constitute a material change that would require an IRP amendment?
I think it is robust enough. There are multiple high economic development load cases that did anticipate certain things, as you just discussed. We don't have any firm, I can't get into confidential information as it relates specifically to Facebook or naming any other customers. We did consider a couple of high economic development load sensitivities in a lot of our modeling that anticipated what would happen if similar type situations were to occur in the future. I think the question the question that we need to be answered is, if those situations manifest, do they do so in a reasonable time frame, or do we get hit with requests that may want to be fulfilled quicker than anticipated or even larger than anticipated? But we do have modeling done similar to what you were suggesting.
So I guess the point that I'm getting at, Mr. Phillips, is that I tend to agree with our staff in terms of perhaps there being a feeling of frustration with every single application for additional PPAs are requested on an expedited basis. And you're a planner, and you're saying, your system's robust enough where a data center expansion really is not material that would warrant an IRP amendment. but yet we repeatedly, are asked to expedite these proceedings. And so my hope is only going to last until January 1 of 2023, but my hope is that there be, better planning where, these kinds of applications are not rushed through, where, we're faced with construction schedules that make our procedural schedule challenging, and then it turns the commission against the whole notion of economic development and job creation. And as a former mayor, I don't want to be there. So my hope is that we can get better at this, and I think that would come about by perhaps having planning sessions with your clients like Facebook. So anyway, that's all I had. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, do you have any questions for Mr. Phillips?
Not at this time. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Byrd, do you have any questions for Mr. Phillips?
I do not. Thank you.
Commissioner Hall, do you have any questions for Mr. Phillips?
Just a very short question and comment. I just wanted to state that I also strongly hope that P&M and customer Facebook can look ahead a little better and not bring these cases seeking expedited scheduling, because as Commissioner Maestas mentioned, it creates stresses in our heavily stressed schedule this year anyhow. And I don't feel we have the opportunity to give the case the best attention that we could. And I also don't want to be in a position to be in any way feeling like I don't want to work for as much as I can economic development in the state. And I'm interested to hear that you have other customers coming down the road, possibly, or at least you are in conversations with other large users. And so it just makes me think that we really do need to have a more deliberative, communicative process with P&M to understand what are the best ways to serve these customers, because I don't think our old paradigms are going to work for everything anymore. And we really need to get smarter at this, and rushing in at the last minute and trying to, handle the whole case in a day, is unfortunate. We want to do better for you and for customer and for all the other customers. So I just wanted to make that point. And if you can take that back to planners at Facebook, I'm sure they have a very exciting life. But to the extent that, that message gets through, please make it positive. We want to be, what do they say? If you're not part of the problem, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution here. So, and we want to work with you guys in making let's see what century we're in. Well, making this century something that we can all be proud of in terms of energy technology and development. And then my question, well, I just asked, basically I asked you, I was going to ask you, can you guys please commit to making every effort to not bring these in as an expedited request, but rather decide to work with us in some constructive manner to develop a process that works for this customer and other customers who may be coming down the line, and also helps us get through our processes that we have to by law. So can you take that back to folks and talk about it?
Absolutely, Commissioner Hall. I can take that back to folks, and we 100% agree with you trying to get out ahead of these. You saw recently the issuance of a 2023 economic recovery RFP that mentioned economic development. I hate to say out there, if there's resources available and some of these loads commit to it, is likely going to lead to another expedited filing. But our hope is to be able to find a way to get this process to where it's more manageable.
Great. Thanks a lot. That's all I've got, Madam Hearing Examiner. Thank
Ms.
you, Mr.
Amer,
Phillips.
Ms. Amer, do you have any questions for Mr. Phillips?
No, I have no questions for Mr. Phillips. Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that. That was my dog. She gets real excited for dinner, as does her mother. Okay. Mr. Gifford, do you have any redirect?
Yeah, just one question, if I might, Mr. Phillips. And going to what you've heard from the commissioners and somewhat from also from Mr. Borman, you've heard
Mr. Gifford, could you please speak up a little bit?
Sure, certainly, Commissioner Hall, I apologize.
Much better.
You have heard, Mr. Phillips, that the commission is trying to balance the attraction of economic development with the desire to protect the other customers from any downside risk that these opportunities might present. Would you explain in your own words how this proposed suite of transactions sets that balance or strikes that balance?
Sure. To me, it's relatively simple. The way this transaction is working is there's no incremental cost being added to the generation or production revenue requirements. So the rates for the other customers stay exactly as they are, and Facebook is bearing the cost of that generation. Mr. Fridley will talk about the transmission, and the rate case will protect customers against any cost increases in transmission. So what it comes down to is this proposed transaction has Facebook's the customer paying its own way, and rates for the other customers staying as they are. So there's no increase in cost to them.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Phillips, thank you very much. I'm not going to excuse you as with the other P&M witnesses.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. German or Mr. Gifford, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. P&M would call Todd E. Fridley to the virtual stand.
And Melissa, will you please swear the witness?
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fridley.
Good afternoon.
Could you state your name for the record, spell your last name, please?
Todd E. Fridley, last name Fridley.
And Mr. Fridley, who do you work for and what do you do there?
Work for P&M. I'm the Vice President of New Mexico Operations, which is all of the T&D operations for the company.
And could you please spell out what does T&D mean?
Transmission and distribution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Fridley, do you have in front of you what's been pre-marked as the direct testimony of Todd E. Fridley as P&M Exhibit 11?
I do.
And Mr. Fridley, do you have any corrections to that testimony?
I do not.
And Mr. Fridley, if I were to ask you the same questions today, would you give the same answers as are contained in that testimony?
Yes, I would.
And we can see you now, Mr. Fridley. Let there be light.
You went off right before I got on here.
With that, Your Honor, I would move the admission of P&M Exhibit 11, the direct testimony of Todd Fridley.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
P&M Exhibit 11 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. The witness is available for examination.
Okay. Mr. Borman?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Fridley.
Afternoon.
I'm going to be really brief, and you might have heard me ask this question of a different witness. But would the installation of the 100 megawatts of new energy storage require any transmission system upgrades?
It does not.
There are no transmission system upgrades that would be required to install it?
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Chairman Fishman, do you have any questions for Mr. Fridley?
Yes, just a couple. Welcome, Mr. Fridley.
Thank you.
Are there the battery storage that would be installed? Would it have any impacts at all on distribution investment?
No, it would not. It would be included into the transmission grid. As previous witness Tom Falgren mentioned, the benefits of the battery itself as a storage device provides more of a bulk electric service where its capacity, frequency regulation, and that sort of thing in order to operate the transmission grid.
Right. Does it potentially decrease the need for future investment in transmission or distribution?
Neither in this case. It's co-located at the solar site. So again, it does not require any, and it would not produce any further needs later on.
That's it. I'm good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Commissioner Maestas, do you have any questions for Mr. Fridley?
Madam Presiding Officer, can I just pass right now?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, do you have any questions for Mr. Fridley?
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Byrd, do you have any questions for Mr. Fridley?
I do not, Officer Glick.
Commissioner Hall, do you have any questions for Mr. Fridley?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Maestas, we came back to you pretty quickly. You're on mute.
Just to see him talk muted.
Okay, you're still on mute, Commissioner Maestas.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Amer, do you have any questions for Mr. Fridley? Okay. I'm going to assume no. Mr. Gifford, do you have any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Fridley. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Ms. Glick, I had trouble unmuting myself, but I did not have any other questions for Mr. Fridley.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Gifford or Mr. German, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. PNM would call as its next witness Kyle Sanders to the stand.
Hello.
And Melissa, will you please swear the witness?
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sanders.
Good afternoon, sir.
Could you state your name for the record, spell your last name, please?
Yes, sir. My name is Kyle T. Sanders. Last name spelled Sanders.
Mr. Sanders, who do you work for and what do you do there?
I work for PNMR Services Company. I am the Director of Cost of Service and Corporate Budget.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. And do you have in front of you what's been pre-marked as PNM Exhibit 12, the direct testimony of Kyle Sanders?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
I do not.
And Mr. Sanders, if I were to ask you those same questions today live on the stand, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir.
With that, Your Honor, I would move the admission of PNM Exhibit 12, the direct testimony of Kyle T. Sanders.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
PNM Exhibit 12 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. The witness is available for examination.
Mr. Borman.
I regrettably do not have any questions for Mr.
Okay. Chairman Fishman.
I thankfully don't have any questions.
Commissioner Maestas.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar.
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Byrd.
No questions. Thank you, Officer Glick.
Commissioner Hall.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Ms. Amer.
No questions, thank you.
Boy, Mr. Sanders, you got off easy.
I like it.
But thank you very much for appearing.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Gifford or Mr. German, you may call your next witness. And this will be your final witness, I think.
I think Mr. German.
What did I say? Oh, Mr. German, okay.
So you're correct. This is our final witness, and PNM called Michael Setledge.
Sir, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Setledge, can you state your name and position at PNM for the record?
My name is Michael J. Setledge. I am a pricing principal for PNM.
And can you identify PNM exhibit number 13?
Yes, that is my direct testimony in this case.
And was that direct testimony prepared by you or at your direction?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any corrections you would like to make?
Yes, a couple of typographic corrections. On page 6, line 4, there should be a period after the special service rate number, NO period 36B. Also, on page 16, line 12, it should read, recovered from the customer through rider number period 47, but will be used by PNM. So adding the NO period and the word be on that line.
Do you have any more corrections?
I do not.
And Madam Hearing Examiner, I'll represent that those corrections were made in the version of the testimony uploaded to Dropbox. So, Mr. Setledge, with those corrections, is your testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, it is.
And if the same questions that were asked of you in the testimony were asked of you here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
I will move the admission of PNM Exhibit 13.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
PNM Exhibit 13 is admitted.
And I'll pass Mr. Setledge for cross-examination.
Mr. Borman.
Once again, I do not have any questions for Mr. Setledge.
All right. Chairman Fishman.
Yes, just a couple of questions. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around the idea that there's no additional cost to other customers if Facebook basically spends $7.9 million a year on the storage, but then because of that, say gets a credit of $10 million, using example C from the exhibit we discussed earlier. It seems to me that somewhere that revenue needs to be recovered and that it would be reflected in some of the factors that come forward in a rate case. Can you enlighten me further? Get me out of my confusion.
I can try.
Okay.
So the way I think of this is the customer did bring a resource. That's what we're talking about here is that ESA. And so because of that, there was no additional resource needed. So we did not need to procure anything on behalf of the other customers that they would have to pay for. So because of that, even though the previous rate case said it would be $54 and some change to add that per KW, that really wasn't spent because that customer paid for everything. So because they paid for it, regardless of what credit they get, nothing was spent, so they get a credit back to the nothing that was actually spent. They're paying the entire cost and the entire system enjoys the benefits from that. So there really isn't, it's really not, there's nothing, we didn't add additional resources. The customer brought their own resources to cover what they needed. So there is nothing else for the other customers to pick up because customers supplied their own. I don't know if that makes sense. That's sort of the way I think of it in my mind.
Okay. I'll just mull on that and continue to stew and try and understand. So if anyone comes up with, I guess what I need to see is probably some more specific ways of how this stuff gets calculated in the rate case to feel comfortable with what you're saying. So I don't even think it's fair in this venue to try and ask you to explain that and me to understand it. But I'll give you the chance if you think you can add any enlightenment there without confusing me.
All I would say is that that $54 is based on the previous rate case. When we have a new rate case, we'll look at the entire revenue requirement, production revenue requirement for everybody, and that number will be completely a different number. And so it will change. I don't know whether it'll go up or down, but it will change. And so at that time, the calculation will be different anyway.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Maestas, do you have any questions for Mr. Setlich?
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, do you have any questions for Mr. Setlich?
Yes, I do. I would like to ask, I think we are tired of hearing projects where we're being asked to approve projects, renewable energy projects, and with no explanation. And the bottom line is the customers will see how much they will be paying once they receive their bills. I don't think that is right. I think there needs to be a clear explanation of how much it's going to cost to approve these projects. And throughout the day, I've been hearing one witness after another. We don't, we're using scenarios, different scenarios. The numbers are going to change. Everything changes from day to day. Those are the type of responses that we have heard from the witnesses. But we stand here to protect ratepayers. And you cannot convince me with these different scenarios with no true numbers. And I also reviewed certain emails going back and forth on the bench request. P&M is saying this is a protection order, confidentiality, but the customers, the ratepayers are not. They're seeking our help as commissioners to dissect the information and to look at every cost that's going to be applied for consumers. So I am a little frustrated by the end of the day. We're close to the final, I think this is the final witness, and this is my conclusion. It's not my decision yet, but I'm sharing with you my observations throughout the day. So that's just my remarks for now. Thank you very much.
Okay. Commissioner Byrd, any questions for Mr. Settlage?
No, ma'am.
Commissioner Hall, any questions for Mr. Settlage?
Oh, yes. Just related to this subject that is the sticking point for Commissioner Fishman. And I appreciate your succinct answer, but the question that popped into my mind when you gave that answer is, if that's true, why do the numbers look the way they do on table 4B are such that it appears that while let's see if I can phrase this right. Oh, yes, that helps to look at it. It appears that while customer pays $7.9 million, and we're told that, you know, they're credited whatever amount they pay, there is still this large offset out there based on the fact that the customer brought is essentially bringing the solution to their need to the table insofar as they're going to pay for the storage unit. Nevertheless, it appears that the customer reaps a sort of premium credit. Can you just explain why it has to be accounted this way? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's just the way the numbers are presented, but it presents a problem for Commissioner Fishman and me somewhat. And that's going to make it harder for us to reach a decision. So it would be really helpful if, you know, you make it a little clearer than just saying the customer brought their solution with them. I get that part. I think we all get that part. But it'd be nice to understand why there's this line 8 here that shows this large credit, and we want to know the meaning of it. And what is that? Why does that not represent some possible risk of payment that may have to be made by other customers to cover the revenue it must represent?
Yes, I'll do my best to try to add some clarity to that. I appreciate your concerns. So what I would say on line 5, that is the amount the customer actually pays. No matter what, they're paying for that storage agreement. They're paying the full cost of that. Right. In every single scenario, regardless of what their load is, if their load needs that, if their expansion needs any of that or not, they are paying for the entire amount. In line 8, that $21 million benefit is really what that is based on the rate from the previous rate case. But that benefit is always to the entire system, regardless of what their load is. So they are paying for that. The system is getting that benefit that's represented by that $21 million based on the numbers in the last rate case. And then the credits, the offsets, I should say, line 3 is trying to say, if we had to add capacity at the embedded rate of the system, which is the 5457, what would it cost to do that? And then conversely in line 9, that's saying, well, because you're bringing $21 million of benefit, we'll give you the full amount of that back because we didn't have to add that. We did not spend money at the embedded system rate. Customers spent money, actually in this case, at a lower rate is how it worked out to cover that same need.
Too high level. Can you go a little simpler? I'm sorry, I know that's probably as simple as you can do it. But, so let me see if okay. I totally get customer, and line 5, that's what the company pays.
That's what customer pays, sorry. Capital C
Customer
customer.
pays, I mean to
Yes,
say.
yes, sorry.
Right, your company, I guess. And it's at a dollar figure of 54.57, which is getting based on the last rate case and will change.
May I interrupt there for just a second?
Yes.
Line
right
5
ahead.
is based on the cost of the ESA. So that's what's spelled out in the contract. And that one happens to be at $6.60 is what it spells out per month. So line 5 is not based on the 54.57. That's based on what's in the ESA.
Right, I'm sorry. Right, getting
That's
punchy.
okay.
Okay,
Sorry, please continue.
I'd rather you continue. Give it to me one more time and then I'll give up. But if you can simplify it a little bit more. Okay, this is what you said. You said line 8 is a benefit to the entire system. So I'm not sure I understood that before. I thought that was a benefit to customer. I don't know if that was Commissioner Fishman's confusion, but that was mine. So when you say that's a benefit to the entire system, can you elaborate a little bit?
Okay, let me say that a little bit differently.
Okay.
That 100 megawatt storage unit, the value of it using the 54.57 is that 21 million. So that is the value of that storage. So if the system, in theory, if we hadn't had to add 100 megawatts in the previous rate base, in the previous rate case, that's how much the savings in rate base would have been. Again, these are just theoretical numbers, but that's what the calculations show. So that is what the value of a negative 100 megawatts of load, so to speak, or 100 megawatts less resources, I think is a better way to say that is.
What's the better way? 100 megawatt, what did you say?
So it's 100 megawatts of storage, which is essentially a resource, but if we hadn't, if in the last rate case we had not built 100 more megawatts, this is trying to say that at those rates, that's how much the savings would have been. The contribution to reduction amount would have gone down by $21 million if we had 100 megawatts less production.
Right, I get it. And so it's, I mean, that's a value. That's the value of the proposed construction of the Sky Ranch ESA.
Right.
To the system. That's the value to the system, essentially. So, so is that the basis for saying that there will be no cross-subsidization?
The basis,
this is not a credit to customer. This is, well,
it's a maximum offset. It's not a credit to customer. These really are offsets. The word credit, I think, is a little misleading.
Okay, so how does the offset work exactly here in this situation?
Okay, going back to line 5, customer is going to pay that no matter what. No other customer, capital C customer, will pay that 7.9 million. And that will get that resource onto our system so that P&M has dispatch of it, and that whatever benefits there are go to the entire system from that resource. Depending on how much incremental load the customer brings based on that 54.57 rate, because that is always less than the 21 million, they'll essentially not have any overall impact on other customers because they're already bringing more benefit than what their allocated benefit, what their allocated cost would be for that incremental load.
Okay, wait, I think I'm having a breakthrough here. So say that again. no matter how much load the customer brings, they have brought more
Value.
capacity.
More allocation
Value.
value, right? The 21. So if you look at the 50, that's $10 million of incremental production allocation, but they're already bringing a negative 21. They've already brought $21 million of value. Their increment is less than that, so they get credited for their full 10 because they're already doing better. It never goes the other way. They never get a payment from any other customers. But since they're already providing more value than what they need to, it doesn't cost them anything additional either. They're already paying the 7.9 million.
They meaning Facebook.
Facebook, well, yeah, customer,
already
Facebook, yes.
Like, right. Well, can I just ask why do we avoid saying Facebook? Why can't it say Facebook? Is that too general a term as the customer in your contract?
I think that's more of a legal question. My understanding is that our contract is actually with a sub company of them called Greater Kudu. And so Greater Kudu is the customer. And so, but I don't know the exact ramifications of that. I just know in general, P&M does not identify individual customers. But I think everyone knows who we're talking about in this case.
Absolutely, except it's confusing when commissioners have to worry about all the other customers too. That makes it a little.
Yes.
Anyhow, all right. So I guess I have no more questions. This helps me. I don't know if it helps Commissioner Fishman, but this seems to be different to me than what I was understanding before, insofar as the $21 million is an offset for the entire system. What does it offset? Tell me that.
It is I would say it's the value of what that storage facility is to the entire system. And per the special services contract, Facebook gets some value for that. The only thing that the addendum talks about is that line 6, whether that's what percentage that happens to be. How it's allocated between these rate cases.
Yeah.
So it's really, go ahead,
and so,
sorry.
What is the reassurance you can provide me that other customers don't end up having to somehow subsidize customer, capital C, expenses anywhere?
I think the simplest way I think of that is just this, we're talking about this storage agreement. It's a purchase agreement with the energy supply, ESA, and customer Facebook is paying for every bit of that. No other customer is paying anything for it. P&M gets that as if every customer was paying for it, regardless of who pays for it. P&M gets that for their system benefit for all retail customers and uses it that way for the benefit of everyone. You know, they're blind to Facebook's needs. Facebook doesn't enter into the daily operation decisions. They just have resources and obligations of load to meet. And this is just one resource that's there. This one happens to be free to the other customers other than Greater Kudu.
Okay, that does help me. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I think I understand this now. Thank you. And I have no more questions, Madam Hearing Examiner.
Mr. Settlage, I have one follow-up question. So you are saying that the difference in scenario C, the difference between the number in row 3 and row 5 of about 3 million, which I'm gonna characterize as a subsidy. You're saying that really isn't a subsidy because the number in column in row 8, the 21.8 million number is more than that. Is that?
I think that's correct. I would even say that even the row number 3, I mean, it boils down to, in my mind, the fact that this particular agreement is at a lower rate than the embedded cost of capacity. And so therefore, customers are able to spend less than the embedded rate to cover their needs. Just through the approved rate that the commission approved in the last rate case is lower than what this particular agreement was negotiated at. I'm sorry, the agreement was at lower than the last rate.
Thank you. Ms. Amer, any questions?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Settlage. I understand how you came up with line 8, and everyone from PNM describes it as a benefit to customers. But to me, and I could be missing something, that presupposes that the customers actually needed the 100 megawatts of storage. And if the customers needed that prior to Facebook coming in, I don't understand why it wasn't in the IRP. So I guess my question is, it only appears to be a benefit that's worthy of a credit if the customers actually needed it. And so can you explain whether or not the retail customers actually need that 100 megawatts? And if so, why wasn't, it sounds to me from everything that was said that PNM wasn't thinking about it at all until Facebook came to them.
Yes, so again, this is assuming Facebook was adding their increments of their load, right? So Facebook was expanding and going to grow and add load. And so because of that, as PNM witness Falgren mentioned, we had to add resources. They had a hole, is the way he described it. They had to be filled with capacity and energy. And that's the reason why this is a benefit to all customers, because it's more than what was necessary for Facebook, number one. And number two, we have operational control. So there's many, many benefits of this other than capacity, as Mr. Falgren mentioned a few of those. All these other benefits accrue to all customers. It's more than just the value of production capacity.
I guess my question though is, if Facebook hadn't come to PNM and said that they were going to increase their load, would PNM have done 100 megawatts of energy storage because retail customers needed it?
I think PNM witness Phillips could answer that completely, but I do know that for our other cases where we're retiring units and adding more resources, that includes some storage as well. So PNM has been looking at storage and proposing storage as replacement resources. As generation goes down or as load goes up, we need to fill the gap, and storage is a good way to do that. Part of it, it meets some of the needs. Renewables meet some of the needs, and storage meets some of the needs.
Thank you, Mr. Settlage.
Mr. German, do you have any redirect?
Do not.
Okay.
Hearing examiner Glick, I did have one follow-up question, which Mr. German may want to follow up on as well. May I?
Of course.
Okay. So again, I keep looking at this model and just trying to get more depth on what's going on. But another potential way to look at this is to say that Facebook is paying $7,920,000 to cover the cost. And I get the benefits of the upfront coverage of costs while transition and use of the batteries in place. But on the other hand, they're getting a credit for approximately 3 times that amount, the 54.57, based on the total system cost of capacity. Would that be a correct statement? That the credit per unit of capacity is 3 times as high as the actual cost for this contract?
Yes, but it's not exactly apples and apples. That 54, again, is for production allocation purposes. That's how we allocate those costs to the various rate classes. That is used to do, that's what the numbers came out to be, I should say, that was approved in the last case.
Yep.
And in this case, yes, I would think of it as the embedded cost is greater than the current cost to add a similar capacity, similar resource. Cost of capacity is lower now than then. When we do another rate case, we'll have a different mix of resources, a different mix of base rate costs, and there'll be a new number.
And that's the mechanism by which you say that customers are not paying other customers than the customer, Facebook, are not paying more because you're saying that basically that credit is at their embedded cost already.
Let me try to say this a slightly different way. Right now, every customer has a base rate that it's fixed. It was fixed in that last rate case, whenever that was. Because of this, those rates are not changing. So therefore, there's nothing more to collect from other customers because their rates are not changing, so it can't be collected from them. They're already paying for what was in that rate case's production revenue requirement. So that's how come I know that the other customers are not harmed, because there's no mechanism for them to be harmed. Their rates are not changing.
Okay. Still struggling with that piece of we're giving them credit at 3 times as much as their actual cost. And to me, that feels like a subsidy. So I'm still not convinced. But again, I would like to personally leave things open that we can have further discussions on that and ask for some flexibility, because I do think it's a great thing to make this deal work. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Mr. German, any redirect now?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Settlage.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Mr. Borman, you may call your witness.
Thank you. Staff calls John Reynolds.
And Melissa, will you please swear the witness?
Yes. Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds.
Good afternoon.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, and I'm the Utility Division Director.
As part of your duties in that position, did you review the application by Public Service Company of New Mexico for approval of the 2 PPAs and the ESA, along with other related approvals that they filed in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
And based upon that review, did you prepare or participate in preparing testimony regarding that application?
Yes, I did.
Do you have available to you the document marked as Staff Exhibit 1?
Yes.
Can you identify that document?
That is my prepared direct testimony in this case, filed April 14th.
Was Staff Exhibit 1 prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to Staff Exhibit 1?
Yes, I'd like to make one change. On page 24, line 15, at the tail end of my testimony, it refers to the Sky Ranch PPA, but PPA should be ESA.
And now I will represent that correction has not been made on the version that was distributed to the parties and the commissioners yesterday. I can commit to making that correction tonight and sending it out to everybody so that they have the corrected version.
And can you also substitute the corrected version in Dropbox?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
If I asked you, Mr. Reynolds, if I asked you the same questions as are set forth in Staff Exhibit 1, as you have just corrected them, would your answers be the same?
Yes,
And are those answers true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
yes, they are.
Okay. Do you adopt Staff Exhibit 1 as your sworn testimony in this matter?
I do.
Do you also have a document before you that has been marked as Staff Exhibit 2?
I do.
Okay. Can you identify that document for us?
That is my prepared supplemental testimony filed in this case on June 2nd.
And was Staff Exhibit 2 prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any changes or corrections to Staff Exhibit 2?
I do not.
If I asked you the same questions as are set forth in Staff Exhibit 2, would your answers be the same?
Yes,
And are those answers true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
yes,
Do you adopt Staff Exhibit 2 as your sworn testimony in this matter?
I do.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to move admission of Staff Exhibits 1 and 2.
Is there any objection? Staff Exhibits 1 and 2 are admitted.
Mr. Reynolds is available for examination.
Okay. Mr. German or Mr. Gifford?
We have no questions for Mr. Reynolds.
Okay. Ms. Gould?
No questions, Madam Hearing Examiner.
Okay. Chairman Fishman?
Mr. Reynolds, could you please expand a little bit, or explain maybe in concise terms what your concerns are about overcapacity or acquiring more capacity than customers need? I take that as part of, it's been a while since I read your testimony. Could you summarize that thought for me?
Yes, I'll try, Commissioner Fishman. My concern in this, one of my concerns in this case is the acquisition of 100 megawatts of storage, which is more than what PNM said it needed to maintain reliability at its level before the expansion, before the proposed expansion and the addition of the proposed resources. I had concerns about recognizing that that the customer has certain. There's an agreement that the commission approved in the last case, an amendment to the special services contract that provided for alternative energy projects. But in this case, I was concerned about the implications of the additional storage, because as I've gotten to understand over the course of the case so far, I did have concerns that it would result in some cost shifting, and some of it has been discussed in reference to the table that's been addressed a number of times today, and some of it that has been discussed less is what will happen in the next rate case after the storage facility comes online. And as was explained about the $54 number, which is essentially the average value per kW of a production infrastructure to support the grid, means which is then allocated to rate classes. This particular rate class, rate 36B with a single customer, in the next rate case, after the storage facility comes into operation, will presumably participate and intervene in that case, and will make the argument that they're bringing capacity to the table. and therefore they should not be allocated the value of the capacity that serves them. They should be only allocated the value of the capacity that serves them, less the value of the capacity that they're bringing to the table. So that results effectively in the customer being responsible for its own share, for a portion of the capacity that's needed to serve them. And by acquiring that capacity at the $7.9 million per year, if they avoid allocation of that amount or more in a future rate case, then the other customers would be picking up a higher share of that tab. So that is my concern. I hope I was concise enough.
Okay. In terms of system capacity, there were lots of, I'd asked prior witnesses what was going on in terms of system needs and requirements based on the fact that they put out an RFP soliciting over and above the project that's falling behind another $500 megawatts of potential capacity. In this flux time, if we were to say yes to this deal and we had 50 megawatts more than required just to serve Facebook, would you consider that an extravagant overinvestment, or would you consider that a safety clause, a safety net in case we fall short? And would you consider in another procurement case for, say, replacing assets for or replacing capacity for Palo Verde, would you put that in a loads and resources table and deduct the amount of resources that we need to acquire?
If I understand your question, you're asking whether the capacity that the customer brings to the table should be included in the loads and resources table for the grid. Is that correct?
Actually, that's it was a long way getting there, but you summarized it well.
I mean, I think effectively, well, first of all, I mean, PNM's witness, Nicholas Phillips, I think he indicated, I think earlier today, and his written testimony that these resources were in the IRP that was filed earlier this year. So they are currently showing those in the IRP, and those were selected by the customer, the facility is contracting with PNM. So PNM is the buyer of that energy. The energy goes into the system. And so I believe that, the fact that PNM is acquiring the energy, but PNM is being reimbursed through a cost recovery mechanism that's altogether separate. I mean, I think that it is appropriate for PNM to handle it the way it did in the last IRP.
So would you agree with the statement that with other replacement resources being required in this particular storage resource going into the loads and resources table and in the IRP, that we'll have ample opportunity to be sure we're balancing the total capacity on the system properly? This does not force us to overinvest in capacity.
I mean, I don't think it forces us to overinvest. I think we are investing early in capacity. That's how I would characterize it.
And how early would you say that is? A year early, 3 years early, 10?
It's hard for me to judge. I would rely on the testimony of Nicholas Phillips, and he has a bar graph that shows the capacity need of the expansion, the customer's expansion. and the timing of these proposed resources. I mean, there's no data that I've seen that just just it's illustrated graphically. So I think he's a year and a half, 2 years ahead of the need, as I recall.
Okay. In the current pricing model that they have, until PNM starts getting credits, they're picking up the full cost. We don't know the timing of a future rate case. If we were to apply a pricing mechanism similar to what they've put forward, because I'm not convinced on this one yet, not even close, but if we were to adopt a similar pricing mechanism where Facebook reimburses PNM for the full contract price each month, would that mitigate the financial exposure to ratepayers? Of the temporary overcapacity?
Can you repeat that question?
So under the current contract, if there's a low amount of that battery capacity that applies, that is attributed to Facebook in the billings, they don't get very much of a credit, and they're essentially paying upfront the cost of that extra capacity that's sitting there and used by the rest of the system. So my question there is, and I think the PNM folks have been pretty accurate in representing that. So I'm asking John if there's that kind of mechanism in whatever pricing model is eventually adopted, does that mitigate the potential exposure of customers to the expense of temporary overcapacity?
Based on what I've heard today, it seems like for this storage project, which is, looking at my notes, the expected commercial operating date is the end of 2023. So it's 2.5 years away, first of all. Mm-hmm. So the timing of the rate case from that point forward is the unknown. And so between December 31, 2023 and the outcome of the next rate case, I wouldn't disagree with you that the customers are protected from fronting. That's $7.9 million annual cost of the ESA.
Okay. So I'll just make my last question open-ended. What else should we know, or what else would you add in terms of the pricing mechanism that's been proposed, and perhaps what you think should be proposed as a pricing mechanism going forward? So basically just asking you for your thoughts.
Well, by pricing mechanism, are you referring to that table that we've looked at quite a bit today?
Yeah, the table and the addendum.
Yeah, I mean, the $54 will change in the next rate case, that's for sure. So I think we know that. And to me, the issue is that how much reallocation of system production revenue requirement would need to be reallocated outside of rate 36B in the next rate case to equal or exceed $7.9 million. And I mean, the $54 it's a high number relative to the $6.60.
Yep.
And so I think some of those values are out of sync from a 6-year-old rate case versus today's competitive ESA pricing. and a 6-year-old rate case, which has, a mix of resources, old and newer, and legacy costs that are being recovered by all customers. And, so I think that, to make this, my read on this is that the customer would like to bring capacity to the table to mitigate allocation of overall system production costs to them. And, how we deal with that, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe that's the agreement we have. And, but I don't know the answer to that, to your question about, do I have a specific proposal?
Okay. And would it be correct to say that because we don't know the outcome of an upcoming rate case, that your feeling is there's perhaps some risk to consumers other than Facebook in this formula?
I believe there is, yes. And I think that, but by the customer trying to essentially select their own capacity or a portion of their capacity needs, that they are therefore, as a result, not bearing the cost of the overall capacity that's needed to serve the entire grid. And that's my view on it.
Let's say that we adopted an addendum where, we didn't adopt an addendum. We just went forward with the storage project. PNM pays for it as they normally do. How would you assess the potential impact of that on other customers, short-term and long-term, as compared to what we've been presented in the addendum? That's a lot to answer, I know, but any perspectives you can give me about thinking about that would be useful.
Well, I think that was, that concept was mentioned by Michael Sedlich, I believe. And it would be what your scenario you're laying out would be recovery of costs through the traditional cost of service study, and where all system production resources need a certain revenue requirement, and what's the appropriate allocation of the totality of those costs to each rate class based on the mechanism that was used, the 4CP mechanism based on the peak demand in 3 summer months and 1 winter month, as opposed to, I think, where we appear to be headed, where some rate classes would essentially carve out their own portion of their own production requirements. And so I think we need to be cautious about moving in that direction, where customers, to some extent, get the ability to select the resources that serve them and not bear responsibility for other resources that they say are not necessary to serve them.
Under the traditional scenario that I just presented, as opposed to the addendum, would there ever be a case where increasing use of system, increasing use of resources or increasing generation would lead to a larger credit against their actual costs? Or would costs actually go up with increased usage of system resources? Because we've seen, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm trying to understand the question a little bit better. I mean, are you saying that, are we as the customer uses is a greater share of the overall load, are they likely to see an increase in the credit?
No, throw out the addendum right now. Just think about our traditional, well, just take the current contract where, Facebook gets system charges for the amount of power they use from the system. And I think it's a fixed charge each month. It was negotiated in the contract. I don't know how it gets adjusted. But would there ever be a circumstance there when they use an increasing percentage of the total system load, that their costs for that their system costs would ever go down as they became an increasing part of the load?
Well, as they become an increasing part of the load, and presumably they continue to rely on renewable energy resources, on intermittent resources, then there will be increasing need to rely on capacity, that whether it's battery storage or dispatchable resource, and this will put more pressure on, especially during times when the intermittent resources are not available. So this is something the entire industry needs to deal with as renewable energy becomes a growing portion of the overall system. And so this customer's load and its growing load is accelerating that transition to a higher share of intermittent resources, and which is by generally beneficial for the environment, but it is may be considered more challenging to serve from a utility perspective. It's going to require further investments in capacity and a variety of other resources that have limited impact on emissions and yet are dispatchable.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Fishman, we've been going over an hour and a half. I think it's time to take a break for the court reporter, if you don't mind.
Not a problem. And I'm going to finish up quickly after the break.
Okay, so let's take a break and come back at 5:15.
No, that's okay.
I don't know. I think you folks might have scared away my witness.
I thought I saw him.
Yeah.
He's here.
Okay. All right.
I'm taking that personally, Brad.
Madam Hearing Examiner.
What can I
just,
You can't make it up to me. It's too late.
Madam Hearing Examiner.
Yes.
Carolyn, we're gonna leave. I have to go. So I'm just want to let you know I'm not gonna continue on for the last remaining portion. I'm sure I can read John's transcript. So just want to say that so you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, Melissa, are you ready to go back on the record?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Commissioner Fishman?
So one last little line of questioning here on the first bench request we sent out. We'd asked the question about the all-in cost per kilowatt hour to Facebook versus other customers who were basically served by transmission level, didn't have distribution charges. Have you read their answers to that inquiry?
I did. I'd have to look back at it, but I did look at it. I would have to look
Now, we
back.
may want to put that up on the screen. Whoops, you're on mute, Carolyn.
Excuse me, is this the response to the first bench request?
Response to first bench request. I can't remember which question number. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, is there a particular page? Commissioner Fish?
Yeah, I only recall by the question itself, which was to compare the Facebook cost per kilowatt hour to other transmission level customers.
let me know if I'm coming up on the page.
Bum, bum, bum. I think we want to go more towards the beginning because my memory is slipping on this. It might have been that series of questions that we just went past there. Total amounts. So items 10 and 11 on that series of questions, the responses to that. Oh, and you know something? This might be confidential.
Yes, it appears that some of it is. Do you want to go into closed session?
Yeah, we flip there I just have a couple questions on this, if we can do that.
Okay. Isaac, can you move?
Yeah, give me just one moment. I assume all PNM witnesses as well I should move into the breakout room, or just should it just be the commissioners, yourself, Mr. Reynolds, and Judy?
So not all the PNM witnesses signed confidentiality agreements. I don't think any of them did, actually.
Ms. Glick, I would ask that Mr. Setledge be permitted to join the breakout session because he sponsored this response to the bench request.
Okay, that's fine. So then it would be Mr. Setledge, myself, the commissioners, Robert Lundeen, Jonas Armstrong, Colin Gillespie, James Dauphiné, Kelly Gould, John Reynolds,
Madam
and
Hearing-
Mr. Borman.
Yeah, thank you.
And the PNM attorneys as well.
Yes, I'm sorry. Did you get all those, Isaac?
I believe so. I'm sorry, it just takes me a second to set up the breakout room with this number
No
of people.
problem.
Give me just 1 second.
Sure.
And I'm not going in, right? Just making sure.
No, you do, Melissa,
Oh, I
you do.
Oh, okay.
And the way this works is that you will prepare a separate transcript just of this closed session. And then the other transcript, the public transcript, will exclude what is said during this closed session.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so just to confirm, I'm going to read everyone I have. I'm going to send over. Got Bradford Borman, Carolyn Glick, Colin Gillespie, Jeff Bird, my apologies, John Reynolds, Jonas Armstrong, Joseph Maestas, Judith Amer, Kelly Gould, Melissa Gonsalves, Michael Smith, Michael Setledge, Raymond Gifford, Ryan German, Stephen Fishman, and Teresa Vicente Aguilar. Is that everyone, or am I missing anybody?
I think you're missing Robert Lundeen.
I do not see him connected right now.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm going to move everybody over now.
Commissioner Fishman, do you have additional questions for Mr. Reynolds? No, you're on mute.
No.
Okay, Commissioner Maestas.
Yes, Madam Presiding Officer. Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds. I just want to start off by saying that you were right. A public hearing was required. So, so thank you for that. I think PNM has testified that they're really kind of getting their feet wet in terms of battery storage. There's a new term introduced called controlled storage project, which I believe the Sky Ranch ESA falls under now. But how would you classify the previous battery projects that have been built in conjunction with renewable energy PPAs? Would you consider them to be alternative capacity projects? And how do you see the difference in terms of function between a previous battery project built in conjunction with the prior renewable energy PPA and the proposed Sky Ranch ESA? You're on mute, John, or Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Commissioner Maestas. When you referred to the prior storage project, you're referring to prior storage projects outside of this customer's, outside of what's needed to serve the specific customer?
Yes.
Those are projects that were developed and approved by the commission to meet the projected PNM load. And I don't classify them as either alternative energy projects or controlled storage projects. I mean, those terms of art, I think, were developed purely for the customer and the special services contract. So the alternative energy project, I think, are, as I understand them, are alternatives to renewable energy generation facilities that are contracted by the customer. And controlled storage projects is a term that's introduced in the addendum. As I understand, it's introduced in this addendum that's up for approval in this case. And it's, as I understand it, it's a subset of alternative energy projects, meaning that it's a project that is controlled by PNM, so it's managed by PNM. And but the customer is reimbursing PNM for the ESA cost associated with the project.
Mr. Reynolds, I know you've taken issue with the additional storage above and beyond what was modeled for the customer. 50 was modeled, but we're being requested to approve a 100 megawatt storage project. But really, aside from that issue, do you see some benefit in the versatility of this ESA project that PNM has basically explained that, you know, they can optimize it, they can use it for other purposes for other customers. Do you see this as perhaps an improved evolution in the way PNM is using battery storage for the benefit not just of the customer capital C, but other customers?
So I did hear PNM's explanation for why they think it benefits other customers, and I think they're generally correct about that. But the question it raises in my mind is this any different than if PNM were to have developed this project on its own? I mean, it's a project PNM could could be the buyer as it is now and absorb the cost and recover it through the traditional cost of service methodology, and they could optimize the facility. The only difference between that and what's on the table here is that the customer is paying for it, but the customer is seeking to benefit from it. And I think the addendum provides an avenue for that, and as well as in future rate cases. So I think it's more of a cost recovery issue rather than, in my view, rather than what benefits customers the most or what type of facility benefits customers the most. This one certainly benefits customers and maintains and improves reliability. But it would do that regardless of whether the customer reimburses PNM for it or PNM pays for it and recovers the cost from ratepayers generally.
So we've heard discussions about the way that the Sky Ranch ESA and the PPA are inextricably tied in the context of reducing the cost of the ESI through solar investment tax credits. I mean, do you think that is probably the strategy here, and that it's probably better to pair these two, the Sky Ranch ESA and the PPA, because of the investment tax credits, as opposed to a standalone ESA that perhaps would be more consistent with the intended function?
It does appear to make sense to me to pair the ESA with the PPA. What I'm questioning in that respect is that, and as I said in the answer to the last question, this is a cost recovery mechanism. Why are they not paired just because the customer is not paying directly, not reimbursing PNM for the ESA costs, and PNM is recovering from customers generally, as opposed to having the customer pay the ESA costs and seek to benefit from it in other ways. So I don't see that the pairing and benefiting from the ITC is really at play here. I think it's a cost recovery issue for the storage capacity.
Mr. Reynolds, one of the reasons why I think you are advocating or recommending that we not approve the ESA is because of the estimated $63.4 million network upgrades. So are you implying that there's absolutely no network or transmission upgrades needed that are being funded through the project or attributed to the project or paid for by the customer, and that the entire $63.4 million would be paid by all other customers?
My argument about the upgrades that are necessary, these are upgrades that are necessary to support a project, a pair of projects, if you will, that the customer selected to serve its expanded load. So it's a direct result of what's needed to serve the load. And I think PNM witness Fridley does say repeatedly in his testimony that these transmission upgrades are, the cost of those upgrades are recovered from all customers because they're considered, transmission upgrades are considered to be under FERC jurisdiction and benefit all customers. And, in my view, I take issue with that. I understand the argument, but the fact of the matter is that additional costs are being incurred at the behest of the customer, and these upgrade costs are going to be borne by all customers, not just the customer whose expanded load triggered this investment.
Now, we've we've experienced a Community Solar Act that now allows, and I'll get to the relevance. It allows each community solar project to pay for the impacts to interconnection facilities, because as you know, John, parts of the grid are already experiencing capacity and can no longer accommodate additional distributed energy. But do you feel that maybe costs associated with interconnection facilities should be paid for by the customer or through the project instead of passed on to all other customers through the next rate case?
I do feel that these, I'm referring to transmission upgrade costs. Is that what you're referring to as well, Commissioner Mastis?
Well, I wasn't sure if the 63.4 million also includes costs associated with upgraded interconnection facilities.
My understanding is that it does not. And there is 63, let me see. That 63.4 million is for network upgrades. And then the cost of interconnection facilities is about 1.5 million for Sky Ranch and 774,000 for Encino North. And those are borne by the developer and are recovered through the PPA and ESA costs.
Okay.
But the 63.4 million, those are transmission and network upgrades that are that PNM believes should be borne by all customers, because all customers benefit from transmission upgrades.
Have there been any protests in past projects associated with the expansion or the initial construction and the expansion of the Facebook data center?
I don't believe so. I don't recall any. I was not a witness in those earlier cases. Given that they were all, the final order came fairly swiftly after the application, I doubt it, but I would have to check to be sure.
Well, let me just ask you, I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do you feel that the absence of any protest is tacit support for PNM's application by other large customers? Obviously we have a formal representative representing large customers within PNM service area to support this, but do you think that's a positive aspect to this application, the fact that there's no protest?
I think it's positive relative to the absence of protest is positive relative to the existence of protests, but these accelerated cases are, they don't give a chance to protest is relatively tight. It doesn't, unlike rate cases where every customer gets a notice of the rate case. This is published in some daily newspapers around the state. And so I don't think it gets quite the visibility that a rate case would get among ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Madam Presiding Officer, that's all I had.
Okay. Commissioner Vicente Aguilar, do you have any questions of Mr. Reynolds?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Byrd, do you have any questions of Mr. Reynolds?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, then that concludes the presentation of the.
Your Honor,
I have no questions either, Carolyn.
Sorry, I missed you, Judy.
It's okay.
Mr. Gifford?
I apologize, Your Honor. In light of the colloquy, I know it's a bit unorthodox. I would ask permission to ask Mr. Reynolds under 2 minutes of questions.
I do object that we weren't given that opportunity, and I don't think it's appropriate for PNM to get that opportunity. And Mr. Reynolds, I was not going to ask any redirect questions.
Well, Your Honor, we've had a very long colloquy that is in the nature of supplemental testimony, and we'd just like to ask a couple of questions.
I'm going to deny that. Mr. Borman was not afforded the same opportunity with respect to the PNM witnesses.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So that concludes the presentation of the evidence. And unless anybody has anything else to say, I will adjourn the hearing.
Ms. Glick, I did have something to say. So I believe your initial order provided for closing statements at the end, but I was going to suggest that in lieu of closing statements, instead we do written statements, and they could still be very short. I think PNM would file a 5 to 10 page written statement, and we could file it by Monday, so the commission would have it prior to next week's open meeting. But the thinking is that just due to the length of the hearing, the volume of testimony today would be helpful to take some time and reflect on it, review the transcript, and then put our closing thoughts together in written form.
Thank you for reminding me of that, Mr. German. I'm going to defer to Ms. Amer on that.
Presiding Officer Glick and members of the commission, I believe that that is an acceptable way of doing it if the commission would like that. And then we could we would have the parties, staff could file a closing statement, and Ms. Gould could file a closing statement, and PNM could file a closing statement by Monday, and then we could consider an order at the June 23rd meeting. But it's definitely up to the commission.
So commissioners, any objections to that process?
No objection.
No.
None here. Commissioner Vicente Aguilar? Whoop, did we lose her?
I said no objection.
Okay, terrific. Fine going forward that way procedurally. Certainly worked for the commission.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn?
Thank you again to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you to the court reporter for staying for such a long time. And thank you to Carolyn for doing an excellent job presiding.
Thank you. And Commissioner Byrd, I hope you have some good birthday cake.
Thank you. I don't know. I haven't been in the house all day, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. The hearing is adjourned. Yes, Melissa, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think now we need to just take a vote to adjourn the meeting.
Exactly. So I was just going to ask, any objections to adjourning the meeting? Do we need a vote, Judy?
How do you normally do it?
We just say adjourned and everybody.
Okay.
Okay. I'm hearing no objection, so let us adjourn.
See you guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Right. Thanks.
Melissa, if you need anything while preparing the transcript, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. Sorry, you're muted there.
I'm not used to being muted. Do I need to prepare this in 10? It sounds like people need this transcript faster.
Well, the commission hasn't requested an expedited transcript.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
You might be getting contacted by someone from PNM who might ask you for an expedited transcript. But if they do that, they would have to make those arrangements with the office and pay whatever that fee is for that extra fee.
Okay.
But 10 days for us is fine.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for your help. I probably will have some questions, but I won't know what they are till I get going. So
sounds good. Well, have a good
night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.